Good afternoon. Welcome to Art Basel Miami Beach Conversations. My name is Edward Winkleman, and with Emily Butler, I have helped program the Conversations program this year. Today, our topic is immersive installations, digital experiences in the exhibition. And we have a powerhouse lineup of people to help us talk about this, creators, producers, thinkers, and writers, including closest to me, Rafael Lozano-Hemmer, who is an artist from Montreal. Next to him, Mollie Dent-Brocklehurst, who is the co-founder and CEO of Superblue, Miami's new must-see experience. Next to her is Felix Groden, an artist who is Miami-based. And moderating today is Droitcour, who is the editor-in-chief of the brand-new online art magazine for the NFT era, Outland. Please join me in giving them all a very warm welcome.
Thank you all for coming. We're going to start with some brief presentations from each of the panelists so they can talk about what they do, what kind of immersive experiences they work with. And we're going to start with Mollie, who will present Superblue.
Is this working? Yes. Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming. And I don't know, I'm hoping a lot of you have been to Superblue. Some of you I know have out there. Superblue started really as an idea about artists whose main focus of their practice was about making experiences rather than specifically objects or works that would be more easily sold through the traditional gallery and art fair model. This was obviously a few years ago. And we started seeing, more and more artists creating these incredible moments and feeling like, coming from a gallery model, that there wasn't a way that we could really support them. And so we initially started looking out for commissions in the in the urban landscape. But then we realized through a certain amount of research and seeing some of the artists that we work with, in particular Team Lab and Random International's Rain Room, that there really was a model to be able to find a way to support immersive or experiential artists by creating spaces and selling tickets to come and see their work. And so that was really the basis behind Superblue. And Superblue was kind of founded on this model. We then went out to find a location. We found this incredible building in Miami, and 50,000 square foot over in Alapata, opposite the Rubel Museum, if you haven't been, and commissioned our first kind of Superblue moment. In that exhibition, we have 4 works of Team Lab, including the incredible Cloud Room, which is probably their first really kind of physical artwork that they've made. They obviously are well known for making these incredible projections and interactive projections, but the Cloud Room is really like this very physical piece, and I think for the first time they've made that. We also have a beautiful room of Drifts Meadows. We have a room and also a film about James Turrell and a wonderful Ganzfeld piece. And then lastly, a mirrored room, which is looking at the kind of mapping the similarities between trees and lungs and how incredibly similar they are, and mapping that and then going in through a mirrored room experience to kind of really understand that moment where, the oxygen that's provided by trees is what we depend on, and seeing that connection. So that's our first exhibition. We're really excited. It opened obviously right during the pandemic. It was a bit of a difficult climb to get it all there, getting it there through everything that's going on. But obviously this week has been incredible for us, and we feel like we're kind of fully there on the map. Since then, we have also opened 2 other exhibitions. We've opened an exhibition, which you can see right here, of an artist duo called A&A Murakami in Burlington Gardens in London, an artwork called Silent Fall, which was a kind of an expansion of an artwork that they had made in a smaller version, which was seen 3 or 4 years ago in Miami now. We also have a beautiful exhibition which is currently up at the Shed in New York with Drift. 2 sides of the exhibition, one which is in the galleries and one which comes out on weekends, which is an incredible kind of performance piece using 5 of their flying drifters along with some beautiful music which was written by Anoni. So that's what we have going on at the moment. We have a lot of ambitious plans. We work with a number of different artists, including this wonderful man next to me here. And we're looking to open other centres around the globe, but also really following artists and following their vision and finding ways that we can help and support and create moments where we bring these amazing artists and wider audiences together.
Thanks for that introduction. Felice, would you like to share your presentation?
Yes, thank you, Brian. And that was wonderful. It's a great act to follow, I have to say. So my name is Felix Groden. I'm actually a Miami-based artist. So I guess what I would like to maybe present to you is actually a project that took, I would say, about 3 years to complete. It was at the Perez Art Museum, Miami, which is based here, of course. And basically, I would say it was the first contemporary museum exhibition that totally deployed augmented reality. So what you're seeing really are basically images of both the artworks themselves as well as some process as to how we created this work, which was incredible. Essentially, in, I think, 2017, the PAM was awarded a grant from the Knight Foundation to do a technologically driven initiative, let's just say. They could have taken this any way that they wanted to, but they basically decided to do an artist-driven project. And on top of it, they actually chose a Miami-based artist. So I thought it was a really great approach, actually. But none of us, and I'm being honest here, none of us really knew what we were going to do. And I don't know to what extent we really knew even how to approach this, but we did. And we decided essentially to do 3 out of 4 of the works on the exterior of the museum itself. And they were really large-scale works, which back in 2017 and 18 was, I mean, it seems ancient to me at this point, but it was really pushing the limits of what augmented reality could do. And I'm just curious, how many people here have actually used augmented reality or experienced it? I mean, this is amazing to me because I'm seeing most people raise their hands. I did a panel in 2018 during Art Basel then and asked the same question, and not one person raised their hand. So, I mean, this tells you a lot really about just the distribution of the technology, but also just people's excitement about it. And so in terms of narrative, I mean, you guys are seeing these kind of creatures. As you all know or may not know, but we've got a kind of sea level rise, climate change issue here, as well as in large parts of the world. And we wanted to address it, but the way we did it was kind of a speculative approach where we wanted to imagine what this place would be like in 500 years. So the idea was that we would really look at the grounds of the museum and not so much import works and just put them there, but actually kind of allow the works kind of emerge out of the context itself. So I think being part of this panel is interesting because they are immersive works, and they're very site-specific works. So, you know, it was a really interesting experience. I learned an incredible amount. It was with an amazing team of people. And I just think that, you know, it talks a lot about not just the capacity of the capacities of technology, but I think also institutionally how you can begin to embrace this sort of type of work. So, thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, we'll hear from Raphael.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here today. I'm going to rush through a lot of material, as I usually do, starting with imagery from many decades ago, interactive, immersive environments, experiential pieces have been with us for a very long time. And I specifically love to mention that because I don't like to be called a new media artist. I think that there are traditions of experimentation that go on for a very long time. The thing you need to know about me is that I'm old, and I've been doing this for a long time. This is in 1992. The public is pursued by an eyeball that follows them anywhere they go. This is in 1995. It's a telepresence installation where two people in two separate stations in Madrid share the same telematic space. You see me there with hair, and I'm fit, and I'm being pursued by these blue lights, but in the other station, I'm white lights, and the white lights are intersecting in my three-dimensional location. In other words, allowing two people who are remote to telembody. So there is a way in which you can sort of fit yourself into their location. Pieces that are sometimes more festive, like this is in Rotterdam, where we use shadows projected onto the facade of a building, and people creating ad hoc experiences with their shadows, which is a very intuitive interface to participate. And most of the projects that I've been doing are typically out of control. People self-represent, they do whatever they want. And so it's actually quite rewarding as an artist to just see this kind of an artwork completed by the public. And of course, it's out of my control, as I was saying, so people start having ad hoc experiences. There is no proscenium, there is no beginning and no end. I think of these projects more as fountains where you can go into them at any given time. And this lady abused her boyfriend for 3 hours, and the boyfriend loved it, spent a while doing this. And, you know, over the course of a show like this, which lasts for 3 weeks every night in Rotterdam from 6 p.m. to midnight, you had people, you know, breakdancing. Tuesdays was methadone night at the nearby church, so the drug addicts would come and prance around. Weekends was a lot of families. A man on a wheelchair crushed everybody under his wheels and derived a lot of pleasure from it. And here's the lady just crushing the guy. The idea that the projects are incomplete is a big part of what I do. Most of my work has been outdoors. So I have two lines of work. The work that is outdoors, like these massive shadow plays or pieces we've done at the Olympics and so on. And the other half is in museums. And of course, there is, now with a place like Superblue, what's interesting is that these two worlds, the world of the gargantuan, the performative, the improvised, can coexist with objects which are, more rare or more precious. And I like that a lot. I like a hybrid solution. So this is a piece that I've done all over the world. I'm known for this work, which is Pulse Room, where me with hair, recording my heartbeat, and then as people record their heartbeats onto the installation, everybody gets represented by a little light bulb in the room, and once 100 people participate, you're surrounded by the vital signs of the past 100 participants. So as you walk around, it's like a little memento mori. This piece, which now entered as an experiential piece into several collections, including MoMA, I continue to make Pulse work. So, for example, this is the same idea, but in public space with theatrical spotlights in Madison Square Park, where people add their heartbeat, all the previous recordings get pushed down one position, and what one gets erased. But I'm not done with Pulse. So, for example, I just completed a work called Pulse Topology in Kansas City that is on view right now. And this is 3,000 light bulbs, each of which represents the heartbeat of a different participant. And in this kind of more environment or immersive project, the idea is that there is no content that isn't derived from the public itself. So there's a little sensor. It's actually a photoplethysmography sensor because it was COVID and people couldn't hold a handle. So we did it with computer vision. And the idea is if no one participates, this work does not exist. And that's a big part of everything that I do, that the content be crowdsourced. This is a version of the same project, Pulse Topology, we just did in Toronto in a new space called the Cubicles. And again, for me, what's interesting is the relationship between the participant and how they affect what's surrounding them. I'm less interested in projects where the spectator is passive. And again, this comes from traditions of experimentation, both mine and many other people's, that I want to just make sure that we think of this not as people being original, but continuing these traditions of experimentation. A lot of my work has to do with surveillance. This is a project I did with Krzysztof Wodyczko, where we basically coded the rules of the Communist Party of Poland, where he grew up as a child, where it was illegal to have an assembly of more than 3 people in public space, and there were rules about how far away you needed to be before your presence was suspicious. So we actually track people. And this is, in 2015, we were measuring social distancing, and the project was called Zoom Pavilion, but we didn't even know that Zoom as an app existed. And the surveillance is always used on the one hand with the seduction of participation and inclusion, Instagram, reality TV, and then also the violence of tracking and this kind of Orwellian control, make visible the systems of traction. The closest I have done to an experiential piece that changes over time is called Atmospheric Memory, and is currently on view in University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. There's many, many different kinds of modes or modalities. If you want, it's like a hyper piece which changes over time. And so you see, for example, here Zoom Pavilion operating in that, or this piece which classifies all of the public according to gender, race, and age. So some of the projects are a bit disturbing. I believe very much in being able to create moments that are arresting. I don't think that imagery should be comfortable. Some of the pieces do have some whimsy. So, for example, this is a fountain that writes anything that you say into an intercom in cold water vapor. So this is Caroline Record, the programmer, and she's just said the word nation, I believe. And the woman who's walking around is Rebecca Murdoch, the industrial designer. I mentioned their names because I work in a team of 20 people in Montreal. And I think of myself not as a visual artist, but more a performing arts artist. So I'm the director, but everybody else gets credited. And we very much believe in this kind of collective creation. I'll skip. This is a piece, very recent, done during COVID, 3,000 loudspeakers, each of which plays a different field recording. So it's a massive soundscape. You hear 300 types of birds, 200 types of insects, kids, metronomes, moms. And, it's a very strange experience of cacophony, which we can't hear here, but that's okay. Finally, I believe very much that there's a social practice that needs to be engaged with these works. In the words of the Zapatistas, I'm Mexican, but I live in Montreal, Canada, and I idealize and romanticize my country because I don't live there. But the Zapatistas used to say, we're not asking you to dream, we're asking you to wake up. So in 2019, we put these 6 stations across the U.S.-Mexico border. On the right, you have El Paso, Texas. On the left, you have Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua. And then at the time of this adversarial discussion on the border, we created these massive bridges of light that people could control with a little wheel. And then as your lights intersected the lights of somebody on the other side of the border, automatically a bidirectional channel of communication would open up so that you could speak to the person on the other side. You couldn't see them, but you could hear them very crisply, and they could hear you. If you were not interested in what they were saying, you could just tune them out and look for another station, which was a great thing. The project brought tens of thousands of people in the region to talk to each other across the border. About 70% of the inhabitants of the region have family on the other end. And it was a very moving project because you'd have, families reunited, but you'd also have people flirting. You had serenades. You'd have rappers. There was just a very robust way to bring people together. So all of this to say that I believe firmly that experiential pieces that are immersive, can and should engage with our politics, can and should engage with the issues of our time. And a project such as Border Tuner is ephemeral. It's not something that a gallery can sell. But what's interesting about a place, for example, like Superblue, is that there's no object to sell. It's really just an experience you go see. I should mention, though, that sometimes this project, for example, is completely free for anybody. Okay, so this is more of a civic performance, more of an active piece, but that was funded by philanthropists. But I believe that there's a space for this kind of work as well, even in a place where whereas pay-per-view. So those are my projects, and those are my coordinates. Thank you.
Thanks, and I'm glad you began with a reminder that although immersive art is trending now, you and other artists have been experimenting with these forms for a long time, often under other labels. And just to pick up on your project and also thinking about Felice's AR installation, I mean, you're both engaged with social issues, and I'm reminded of how virtual reality is sometimes described as an empathy machine because work that engages the senses in 360 degrees is supposedly able to have a more visceral emotional impact than something that's viewed on a screen, right? And so do you think the same can be said of an immersive work or an experience? And how do you think about engaging the audience's senses to communicate certain ideas or emotions?
Thank you. That's a big question. I mean, I think that in any artwork, there's going to be a kind of balance between kind of reading the artwork and kind of understanding the basis of it, and then the sensorial kind of experience of an artwork. But I think the things that we're, I suppose, engaging with are kind of four-dimensional experiences. So I think it's something that you're constantly unpacking. I mean, in a way, you're walking a fine line between an intention, really, with a kind of social engagement, but then there's certain things you just can't control, you know. So that's always going to be something left up to, you know, the experiencer. So, but I do think that the work has agency if you approach it that way. Like, for example, in invasive species, I mean, technologically, we wanted the works, for the most part, on the outside of the museum so that everyone could essentially access those works without even going in the museum. So there was a bit of agency with that. But then dealing with something as immense as climate change, it wasn't enough to say, well, we're just going to talk about that. We're just going to have the works kind of say, this is bad or this is good. There was no kind of, you know, this or that in the work. It was really about unfolding of an experience. And the thing that technology can do is kind of provide a platform for a simulation or kind of a way of envisioning things that aren't there. And specifically, I guess, with augmented reality, it's really interesting in the sense that, and I'm interested to hear what Mollie has to say about this, because it's almost like they're opposite sort of spectrums where you're dealing with a kind of clean slate in a sense. And there's kind of an expectation with that. Where it's an augmented reality, there are also expectations with what are you augmenting. So I think that the idea of perception, experiences, these are things you're building. It's almost like an architecture in a sense, but it's always unfolding. Raphael?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that I agree about the empathy machine question because, I mean, I think that technology has a very non-neutral backdrop. I'm very aware of these technologies as emerging mostly from military systems of control and communications. I'm also very concerned about the disconnect between the virtual world and the real, which is why I really like augmented reality as opposed to, say, VR, because we are kind of reaffirming and criticizing or adding poetry to a world that still remains tangible. Having said that, there is a place for virtuality, in my opinion, but the type of virtuality I'm interested in is more the immersive kind, the shared kind. The possibility for us to come together and experience something, not unlike the theater, to be honest, is what I'm more interested in. The atomization of people, I think, is something that at least personally I would like to fight against. And I find that empathy is a really tricky word because it's asymmetrical. It's empathy for whom, and what are the privileges that we have as we engage with these mostly expensive, modern, white man technologies.
Yeah, those are great points. Mollie, I know that this fall Superblue was producing a lot of works that were aimed at raising awareness around climate change as well. Do you want to talk about how the artists you work with approach these questions?
Yeah, I mean, when we started to kind of gather together the artists that would become Superblue, it was a universal theme amongst all of them that it was something that they were incredibly passionate about, and the interesting connection between the fact that they use a lot of technology and they see that the art that they're making can be a force for good, can be, an experience that helps people kind of understand, leads to change, et cetera, et cetera. So, without basically everybody that we're working on, this is their sort of their number one engagement. From Team Lab, obviously, who've really seen this kind of, all of their work goes around a theme of life and then death and then the rebirth, and and the human engagement with the flowers and with the clouds in the exhibition that we have now, always causes the natural element to perish. It is reborn. It's not a desperate message, but that is the engagement always with their work. And obviously, the more people, the quicker the engagement happens. As you said before, the more people, the better. The more things happen in the Team Lab. The communal experience is super important there as well. S. Devlin, obviously, as I mentioned before, has created this work which is really about making that connection. I think that she saw, over the last few years, we saw these terrible fires happening both in California, but specifically in Australia, and then in Brazil, and we saw the lungs of the earth burning, and then obviously our lungs got attacked with the COVID, and the similarity between the visual, what a tree looks like and what a lung looks like is kind of extraordinary, and I think she wanted to make a comment there. I think that with her work, she's very focused on a kind of an activation, a replanting. So, within this exhibition, we've made a donation to this incredible project that Sebastião Salgado does in northern Brazil called the Instituto Terra. And the wonderful thing about that particular reforestation program is that because it's been going on for a number of years, they have this incredible drone footage, which over the last 20 years has seen a completely derelict piece of land grow and be reforested, 72 new species, different weather patterns, a whole new economy for the area, this incredible change. So, that's a very kind of direct way of kind of influencing. We also, through her, we started working with the clothing company Pangaea, who plant a tree every time you buy one of their products. We've also just announced a collaboration with the Atlantic magazine and a commission for Glenn Kino to create an artwork that really talks about environmental justice and the way that the Atlantic magazine is seeing wilderness and the way that we perceive wilderness. So there's a lot of things that we're doing on that front. Also, the piece in London, I think, talks about the fragility of the AA. Murakami talks about the fragility of nature, and although the work in and of itself has just got this message, I think a lot of the programming that we're doing and planning to do around that really will push that message and create that dialogue.
So it has a lot to do with the programs you're organizing around it too.
I think a bit of both. I think that, obviously we wouldn't organize the program if the artist wasn't, I'm going to use the wrong word, keen on us doing that if it wasn't something they felt passionate about. But I think that obviously you've got two levels of whether somebody wants their work to be seen as a direct kind of call to action, or whether they want it to be seen as an artwork, but with that in the back of their head or in the front of their head, but still, kind of keeping that delineation.
One of the things that I find really fascinating about immersive art is that each installation sort of defines its own rules for audience behavior. Audiences who go to immersive experiences usually find themselves doing things that they wouldn't really do in a museum or a theater, like touching the art, lying on the floor, using their phone to interact with the work. And I think the question of defining immersive art is really tricky. We've seen AR, interactive installations, a lot of different things fall under this umbrella, but I would define it as art where the artist is not just making a work, but also designing a protocol for how to interact with the work, right? So I'm just curious how, you approach that as artists, and Mollie, producing these exhibitions, and, what do you learn from observing audience behavior? Do audiences do things that you don't expect? And yeah, I'm curious to hear about your experiences with that.
Oh, well, in my case, I think it was interesting in that, first of all, just to get people to engage, at that time, even, again, a few years ago, it took an effort to kind of where is the art? How do they know it's even there? How do we mark the museum as far as, just orienting, the project itself? So, that was already something that we took on as what are those protocols, because it wasn't concrete for us at that point. But then just sort of observing people, interacting with it, because of course it's all through a smartphone or a device. There was always this element of surprise. The thing is, because in my case it already is a kind of device that people are constantly already interacting with, they were sort of embedded protocols, in a sense. So there was this kind of acceleration of that on one hand, but really interesting to see other people watch those people, because oftentimes in institutions there is a kind of protocol behavior of see and be seen, right? Where in this case, that went out the window completely. And we were actually talking about, well, what if somebody doesn't see where they're going and they fall, or, so that's kind of more passive kind of thought processes. But actively, just the joy of seeing the before and after was really interesting. Again, this sort of level of, what are you augmenting? What am I going to see? And, what am I seeing? And so, and then watching the people who aren't experiencing that, what are they thinking? So I think these are still relatively new protocols that are actually formulating at this point in time. So.
Yeah, I love it when I get it wrong, when I think that people are going to do something and then they come up with something completely different. A really good example of that is I made a project called Vicious Circular Breathing, which is a hermetically sealed glass chamber where you're invited to breathe the air that has already been breathed by everybody before you. It's a completely disgusting artwork that I did in...
Not going to show that again anytime soon.
I did that originally in 2016. We've shown it now in 4 or 5 cities. It was going to premiere at SF MoMA in North America in April of 2020. And as you can imagine, it didn't happen. But one of the things about this particularly disgusting artwork is that I would never go in there. I have massive warnings against contagion because there's no filters, against panic because you need to get in and out through this process of decompression. And then third is asphyxiation because we don't have enough oxygen to stay there for too long. And even though I did all of that, I thought this is a conceptual work. It kind of looks like an aquarium. No one will go in. Everybody wanted to go in. Obviously now it'll be different, but lineups to get into the work. And I love that. I love that the perversity of the public cannot be underestimated. And I'm for it. I'm here for that. So examples like being able to observe the public, almost like an anthropology of behavior in the museum, is fascinating. And in a way, it brings us back to dramaturgy, right? We have traditions of theater, we have traditions of performance that deal with time and space and how to present this, even architecture. So all of this gets involved in the decisions of how the experience will unfold for the public.
Yeah, I guess that really blows up the question of the empathy machine if you're making actually perversity machines. So finding out what people will do. Mollie, what do you have to say about this?
Obviously we are working with a number of different artists, and we, in and of ourselves, are on a complete learning curve. We're learning so much by seeing how people interact in Superblue. Obviously we're trying to open up our doors to an audience which goes well beyond a more traditional museum audience. So we're looking and inviting a lot of people who haven't had so much experience in museums or with art. I think that each of our artists treat it a little bit differently. Team Lab are very concerned about the way that we train our staff. Train sounds like a horrible word, but the way that we, encourage them to interact, because I think when you go into one of their pieces, and a little bit like what you said, you're kind of looking at what the other people are doing, and then you're learning. So you're learning from each other, and and you're also engaging with each other, and that's really exciting. I think with Terrell, he's even older than you, Raphael. He comes from a slightly different kind of school of thought, and he doesn't want too much information. He doesn't want you to take a photograph in his space, and so we've been trying to figure out how to deal with that kind of language, and for us to be going up and kind of telling people who know a lot about Terrell's work, too much about his work, they feel a little bit kind of taken aback. So we ended up installing a film so James can talk about his own work, and you hear it in his lovely kind of twangy voice, him talking about his practice. So when people get in there, they have a sense of what's going on and this kind of incredible kind of spiritual moment that they're about to experience. And S, of course, like you're talking about, the dramaturgy comes from a theatrical background. So I think in her work, she's very conscious and present in the journey that everybody's taking through her work. So, as the platform for all of these artists, we're trying to kind of learn from everybody and then create a kind of a language which will take people from one space to the next and, give everybody the greatest experience that they can have, but also in that particular artist's vision and the way that they want to kind of handle their visitors. But definitely a learning curve, and we don't think we have it right yet, but we're working on it.
Yeah, I went to Superblue yesterday, and I was really struck by how, you're in the Terrell exhibition, it's very meditative, everyone is standing, everyone obeyed the rule to not take pictures, and then you go from that to S. Devlin, which is all about movement and flow, and everyone's taking selfies constantly, like it's all mirrored, and it's, a selfie machine. So that kind of, modulation between experiences, but you also have these sort of videos in between that introduces each one, and so you are sort of passing through, and, the experience of each work is very distinct, and I think that's super interesting. Were you going to say something? No, I thought I saw you pick up your mic. But yeah, I guess the other question I have is, how is the new popularity of immersive experiences changing the art world? I know, Felice, you're working with a museum that received a grant and is thinking, how can we incorporate some new technologies into our program? And I just wonder, do you think that museums are worried about or excited about doing things that, change their protocols, change what kind of resources they need to get to produce things? How is this changing the art world?
I'll jump in, I guess, now. But I think it's a great question. I mean, obviously, we're in sort of the midst of this, okay? But going back to my kind of interest in this, the distinction between the museum institution and something like Superblue is fascinating to me because, in a way, I mean, yes, the museum's institution traditionally, I'm sure, is wanting to, in a sense, what are we going to do? What are we doing? How do we address this? But I think that it's an incredible opportunity, actually, to turn the museum, for example, inside out, which is what we did. So I think it's fascinating, and I think again I'm interested in, rather than say you do this, I do that, or the institution does this, the non-institution does that. I think it's almost sort of understanding this idea of how does the work circulate, where does it situate, and what is its agency, no matter who's putting the show on or not. Let's put it that way. So I think that it's just expanding really where art goes and what it can do, and to me this is a win-win. But where it's going and what it's doing, to me, is actually a very current question.
Yeah, also, I'm just reminded, I remember hearing people talk about how museums are often the first place that people encounter virtual reality or augmented reality, and so there is a kind of educational aspect in what museums can do to introduce people to these technologies that could become more common in everyday life.
And that's basically what Pam did, and they did an amazing job. And I mean, it wasn't just putting on the artwork, but it was also, as you're stating, a kind of level of introducing this to the public and to people of all ages, everybody, no matter how much experience you've had, with technology. So yeah, I mean, there's a huge effort, I believe, with regard to that, in terms of the institutions, yeah.
Yeah, Mollie, I'm also interested to hear you talk about the different kind of economic model of something like Superblue and a gallery or a museum.
So first of all, we're very excited to work with museums. We, an artist like Raphael's working with us. He's got a museum shown every city in the country, right, in the world right now, it seems. But I think that the way that we can do things a little bit differently is that when we set up a model to create a immersive room or an experience, I think we'd rather call it, is our ambition, and again, we're a kind of a new company and we're still figuring things out, is to try and create something or try and work with the artist to create something that is relatively, if that's at all possible, relatively easily transportable, so that after we've shown it at a Superblue, assuming there will be more, it could then travel to another Superblue or be on loan to museums around the world. And we're certainly talking to a number of museums right now. I think that there's more and more interest in the kind of group of artists that we're working with, for sure, both from our point of view, but definitely from museum points of view. But I think that the difference a little bit is that some of these experiences are very expensive to create. So if we can get in there and we see them ourselves as much as a producer, as an exhibitor, that we can find this kind of model by touring the artworks, that they do ultimately pay themselves back the production costs and pay the artist the revenue share that we want them to do. And whether that's at one of our spaces or in a museum space or both is something that we're super happy about and excited about.
What do you have to say, Raphael?
So a lot, yeah. I like hybrid solutions. I like trying it all, especially to support operations. I mean, I think that one of the things that's fascinating about Superblue or other experiential centers is their focus is on living, on live participation or presence. The museums have so many other needs and requests for their attention and resources, things like collecting and conserving and creating a historical context. At the same time, I can't think of a single museum of contemporary art that isn't already thinking about immersion, about performativity and so on. Everybody wants to activate their archive and perform it, or wants to augment the experiences. So I think it's just going to be one of those things where we have panels about this now, but in fact, this is the natural situation. If you're public, in the United States, I think the average American watches 8 hours of screen time a day, whether it's phone, internet, or TV, 8 hours on average. So if you want to engage this public, if you want to speak about, our society, you must engage with these technologies as a way to just normalize your practice. What's really weird is to pretend that all of this is not happening. That's like, I'm always fascinated. I mean, here at our Basel, walking around and seeing beautiful works from traditional media, as there should be. But I don't think that this platform is infected enough by the barrage of audiovisual technologies that is coming. I'm not talking about it like celebrating the technology at all. I'm very pessimistic. But what I'm trying to say is that people keep talking about this as if it's original or new, and as I try to show with a couple of slides, art has always been engaged with these themes, and I see it as just a natural extension of that desire to be of our time.
Yeah. All right, I think it's time to take questions from the audience. Anyone? Okay, right here in the front. Do we need a mic for questions, Emily? Okay.
I'll take the first question. So my question would be, what's the cutting edge of, particularly for Raphael, emergent artwork that would interface with, like you've obviously progressed from 100 heartbeats to 3,000. If you took that to social tokens and extended it into what I guess is emerging to be called the metaverse and said, okay, these people extended beyond. What's the most emergent and creative example of the cutting edge of immersive installations?
Thank you for asking that. I am dying to answer. A poetry reading. That is the absolutely best example of immersive exhibition. When you see artists such as myself adding 3,000 more light bulbs to an installation they did 20 years ago. You just need to know that they're trying to flex languages or vocabularies that they've developed over time. But I have this concept of perverting technological correctness, and that is, which I published in '94 at Leonardo magazine, which is the idea that there's a lot of people who go around saying, well, the resolution of my monitor is this many polygons per second, as if that made it a better artwork. I am so much more enamored by artworks that are made out of more vintage or low-tech or, kind of fragile technologies, because it's really not about a technological development. It's true that we're nerds, and I love what the affordances that these technologies bring us, but the only reason I work with that is because I can't write shit. If I could, I would be a poet, I swear. And I have all this admiration for people who can do that. I'm a nerd, and I live around nerds, and we develop this kind of work, but not because we are looking for the cutting edge. We just want to explore what has been there before and make sure that whatever we do is not just a repetition, that we contribute something new to it. And by new, I don't mean technology, but a feeling, a criticism, a poem, an evocation.
Thanks. I think we had a question up here in the middle. Any other thoughts on the cutting edge, Mollie, Felice?
Well,
Gonna host some poetry readings at Superblue.
Definitely. We're actually planning one for Valentine's Day, and we're going to look at, in London this is, but we're going to look at the kind of the different kind of perception that people had in Romantic Britain, Keats and Wordsworth, and the kind of readings that we all grew up with at school, and how they would compare to this very kind of technical vision of nature that we have in the gallery in London at the moment.
Oh, that's super interesting. Okay.
Hi, I'm Beatrice McBride. I'm the director of photography for the Denton Black Film Festival in Texas. And that was interesting that you mentioned poetry, because we do poetry, slams, etc. And we're going to do an immersive installation later on this year with a very high-profile photographer. Beautiful work. But my question was, when you're talking about interaction between the participants with the work, are you using QR codes? How are you getting the feedback or helping them to interact with it?
Please don't ask me that. I have no idea.
I mean, I can address QR codes actually, and also maybe relates to the question of cutting edge, because to me, part of it I think is also developing partnerships. I think that's actually kind of a cutting edge idea. So when you talk about getting a photographer and maybe another institution or another artist. I mean, we actually exported, Pam actually, we used the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure for invasive species. We exported that infrastructure to the airport. And we did an AR installation at Miami International Airport, which was amazing. And there were some analog kind of qualities to it. But, that was part of the challenge, because you're rushing through a terminal to get to a flight, and how are people even going to have time for this? How do we get them to even do these things? So in my case, it was very tricky. I wouldn't say that we figured it out right away, at least. But again, I think those kinds of things are things to think of through the artwork. How do you get people to engage in something and take time in a space like an airport? But they did. And I watched people scanning the QR codes, and there was signage explaining what it was. And we actually had an iPad set up for anyone in the airport who wanted to just check it out, and people did. So, people have downtime there. Why not, So I just think you need to, in a way, think about how things flow. How do people, move through space, or when they're active versus passive? These are, as Raphael was saying, kind of universal questions of human behavior and perception. So they're opportunities and not limitations.
At the border of Texas, I was at El Paso last year, just after the massacre, 2 years ago after the massacre, and I was very surprised at how fluid the people were flowing between the border. Right. So with your piece there, was it in English, Spanish? Was there any kind of translation? And how did that flow? How did that work as far as the actual process?
So the answer is very long, but just in brief, I did like 10 trips to El Paso, Juarez. I engaged a lot with local communities, artists, activists to ensure that there was a diversity in the presentation. And then on the subject of language, I would say about 70% of the interaction was in Spanish. But we also had, for example, a good representation of indigenous communities. We had Tiwa and De, we had Raramuri, so other languages that are from the region. The fluidity of the border is something that people in the borderlands really want you all to know. Because when we hear about the border, we just hear about antagonism and violence and drugs. And while a lot of that may be true, there's so many other stories that there's no bandwidth to tell. And one of the stories that we need to know is that those are sister cities that were there together 100 years before the United States existed, right? And these sister cities are in fact economically, historically, fraternally, atmospherically interrelated. And the people on both sides are proud of that interconnection. So when you hear about the border wall and all this other stuff that we heard from the past administration and from many people today, they're people who have not been at the border. El Paso has been one of the most safest cities in the United States. When Trump came, sorry, I mentioned his name. Damn. When Trump came to El Paso, he said, oh, well, now that we have a wall, it's a lot safer. And the Republican mayor of El Paso actually got on the mic, kudos to him, and said, well, sorry, Mr. President, but actually El Paso has been, for the past 30 years, one of the safest cities in the United States. And that is in part because we benefit from the economic opportunity of having, these exchanges. And so I really admired that, that people could actually speak against this basically racist, adversarial, and fascist approach.
Yeah, I have a question up here.
First of all, love Superblue, and I loved your work at PAM. I saw that. That was really cool. My question is for Raphael. I'm an event planner, and I usually try to do immersive experiences for the parties and weddings that I do. My question to you is, do you work with engineers or programmers to develop the technology, or are you finding the technology and adapting it?
So we do both. So as I was saying, my team in Montreal is about now 18 full-time people. Half of us are scientists or programmers or engineers. I myself have a chemistry degree. The other half are architects or artists or designers who are quite nerdy. If the technology exists to do what we need to do, then we just use it. If not, then we develop it. We are benefiting we live in Canada, where the Canadian government actually subsidizes some of the salaries for my team because we're seen as a R&D lab. And so I really benefit from that program. But the answer is, it depends on the project. Oftentimes we develop it, and if not, we work with others. We collaborate a lot also with institutions or freelance programmers as well.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my question's for Raphael as well. I think you touched on this a little bit, but kind of given your history and working so long with these, immersive experiences, interactive artworks, have you seen over the last few years a marked change since social media has been the way people are experiencing these works in a lot of ways? Have you seen a change in the way or kind of the freedom people have interacting with your works? And I guess the second part of that question would be, do you now kind of design these works or kind of conceptualize them thinking about the kind of way interactions with them have changed?
Yeah, I would say technology has been normalized. So it used to be, I grew up coming through festivals like Ars Electronica, working with V2 in Holland or ZKM in Germany or ICC in Japan. And these were very specific for technological art. And now what we're seeing is that the technology is now more widespread, more ubiquitous. So I think also everybody is quite sophisticated with what they can do with their own technology. And so there is definitely less of a learning curve when you're, say, presented with an interface. At the same time, there's problematic things, right? Like that we live in a place for the seduction of participation and for the mirage that is the liking something. We sometimes, especially politically, think that if we're engaged in a group, that's as far as our activism can go. But in fact, this is all kind of wrapped into a little bubble that does not have as much traction in reality. So I worry about that. At the same time, I'm not moralistic. I benefit greatly from Instagrammers. The show that we have right now in North Carolina, it was devastating. We had like a media event to talk about it and so on, and a couple of newspapers picked up the news. But then we had influencers night. And some pretty person comes and photographs themselves in the vapor waterfall that we have, and then next day we have lots of sales. So bring on the influencers. I like them, and I like the idea that if I have 25 cameras trained on their body and I'm tracking them, that they can track me right back. So it's complicated, but it depends on the artist.
Mollie, I'd also be curious to hear your perspective on that. Like, how does Superblue think about social media?
I think likewise, like Raphael said, it's one of the missions of Superblue is to really increase the audience, increase the amount of people, the percentage of people out there who have a kind of day-on-day engagement with art and have the kind of wonderful moment that art has come into their life. And I think that traditionally people have been wary about museums and galleries, and the images that come out on Instagram open that door in a way that, there's no advertising that we could do would ever be able to do that. I think it's really useful and helpful and important and encourages people to come and shows people how, in many ways, again, not always like James Turrell, but in many ways how they can interact with the work. So we really excited about it.
All right. Should we wrap up, or do we have time for one more question?
Speaking of social media, I've been following the comments on Facebook Live, lots of great positive comments and lots of requests, Raphael, to know whether you're looking for interns here in Miami. But I've got a question which is about kind of funding, really. I guess a lot of these very large-scale installations and AR experiences require a lot of financial input in order to realize them. And what would be your a word of advice for people who are starting out, artists or, say, institutions that are looking into moving into AR or immersive installations? What level of funding to think about, where to start, really? Or to all three panelists, really.
You can talk about the grant.
I can't directly maybe talk about institutional funding, but I can say in this case that I was involved with, they did receive, as I said, a night grant, which helped. But I think as an artist, as I sort of mentioned prior, you have to be a bit perhaps strategic as far as moving projects along. It depends on how familiar you are with technology. The more you are, the more you can do yourself. But as far as just getting things out there sometimes and distributing and just having spaces to do it, I think the future is institutional hybridity. I think you might have mentioned that word, because when you have hybridity, maybe there's a non-art situation like there was with the airport. So they have an art program, for example, in a non-traditional art place. So you can maybe be a bit, you can leverage things, I guess is, one way to think about it. But I'll hand it off to some other
I think
forms
that
of
also there's, I think it's early days, and I think that, with AR, it's particularly early days in the sense of being able to monetize the kind of projects that you're doing. I think that things are happening. We've just announced a collaboration with Niantic, and a kind of a citywide to then hopefully maybe global AR project that we're developing at the moment. How we monetize that is still something that we have to figure out. It's something that we're really keen to engage in, though. In terms of us working with younger artists, if that's in any way the question, I think that what we do is we're super interested in working with younger artists. I think that what we do is start by trying to find, in the same way as Superblue was born, we try and find commissions for their work, whether they're in the urban landscape, for developers, for clients, for collectors. So we start, we try and bring on an artist and start small to the point that we would get to being able to commission a large immersive work of theirs.
Yeah, I think that the financial aspect is a really important aspect, and unfortunately it's taboo among artists to talk about it, but I really like to talk about it. Somebody insulted me once saying, "You're a budget artist," and I'm like, yep, bring it on. Because I think that being able to write a good budget is a way to maintain independence and autonomy. So my practice is funded by collector sales, museums buying the work through galleries, is funded through performances, so things like what I might do at Superblue or a public art place that could come from private or public funds, usually festivals. And then it also comes from different types of corporate sponsorship. I work with corporations only if they do exactly what I tell them to do. So I'm super proud of how many commissions we've turned down. At the same time, I understand the privilege of being able to do that. But for me, it's key that if you all of a sudden show a logo in the middle of your work, you're betraying the confidence of the public. And it backfires on me and on the company. But if the company wants to do a very museum-like thing where at the end there's acknowledgements or in the program or different ways to do it, I also work with corporations, unless they make like landmines or something like that. I should mention in terms of a suggestion, I and many of the people in my generation started by thinking of the artwork as a vectorial quality. In other words, you start from a concept that you can create a small prototype of, which is quite inexpensive to do, and then go ahead and propose it in an amplified way. Any one of your ideas can then take on this vectorial quality to be amplified to become something bigger. Like everybody else, I started doing just things by myself in a small scale, but think of these artist proofs as kind of seeds or something that can grow into a much more ambitious way. There's no need to go straight to the, sort of finessing the big budgets, because then you're just spending all your time finding the budgets. Start small and be Victoria.
Should have a panel where we just look at everyone's spreadsheets on the projection.
I would love that. That would be amazing. Like how studios support themselves. That would be next year?
Yeah.
All right.
Emily, can we do that? Okay.
Bring your pillows.
This gentleman wants to ask a question. He's been raising his hand for a while, so do last one. Are there any more questions from the internet, or was that the main one? Okay, we're good.
Thank you. I just want to know which is a must-see from you in Art Basel.
What is the must-see?
I know what I'm going to say. You got to see Superblue.
Felice?
Thanks, Brian. Well, I'm actually still going through it, I would say. But I don't have one must-see. I think it's really about just sort of taking in as much as you can and just sort of sifting through it, because it's overwhelming anyway, right? So I'd rather not promote maybe a must-see as much as I would say what's resonating with you, and take from it what you will, basically. So no promotion from me.
Yeah. Raphael, I think you just got here last night, right? You haven't seen anything. I haven't seen anything. Yeah, all right. Sorry we can't help you out there, but enjoy the fair, and thanks for coming. That's all we have time for. Bye.